Hello and welcome. I'm Louise Watt and this is Correspondents, where we talk about the news and what's going on behind the news with reporters around the region. Today I'm joined by journalists based here in Taipei to talk about the US presidential election. What impact will it have on Taiwan, which is dealing with military threats from China? Why was Donald Trump adored in Taiwan when he was president? And how do people here feel about him now? To discuss this and more, I'm joined by Kwangyin Liu. Kwangyin is managing editor of Taiwan's CommonWealth Magazine, which has a focus on industry and the economy. And she's also host of the Taiwanology podcast, which discusses geopolitics as they affect Taiwan. And Ben Blanchard, who is the Taiwan bureau chief of Reuters news agency. He's been based in both Taipei and Beijing, covering the region for more than 2 decades, as well as China and Taiwan's relations with Washington. Thank you both for joining me today.
Thank you.
Thank you, Louise.
Now, before we jump into the US election, let's talk a little about the threats that Taiwan is facing. You both have decades of experience in the region. What's changed in recent years?
So over the last 5 years or so, there's been a fairly dramatic escalation in the Chinese military activities that have been happening around Taiwan. So on an almost daily basis now, we see Chinese warships and warplanes operating in the airspace and in the seas very close to Taiwan. Now we've also seen, certainly since 2022, when then US House Speaker Nancy Pelosi visited Taiwan, China has staged several rounds of war games near Taiwan. So the most recent war games that China staged near Taiwan was, of course, late in May. That was shortly after President Lai Ching-te took office. Now, China said that these were in punishment to what it viewed as separatist content in his inauguration speech. Obviously, these war games make Taiwan's government very upset. The Chinese government claims Taiwan as its own territory, and this is a position that is very strongly rejected by President Lai and his administration.
I think we have really observed there's an increase of cyber warfare activities. So, for example, when Nancy Pelosi visited Taiwan 2 years ago, there was hijack of 7-Eleven screens by, I think, malicious forces. And also, we have witnessed a lot of gray zone activities, including in outlying islands and potential sabotage of infrastructure. And also we see a lot of misinformation or even disinformation campaign. So I think we really see a really multifaceted ways of threats.
Taiwan's security is something that's increasingly being talked about by many countries, not least the United States. President Joe Biden, he said several times that should China attack Taiwan, his administration would step forward to defend it. Now that seemingly went against US policy, which is they will not say what they will do in that situation. How was Biden's words received in Taiwan?
So the US policy has traditionally been this policy of strategic ambiguity, neither saying we will nor we won't come to Taiwan's assistance. But President Biden, as you say, has been very forthright in this, saying, yeah, if China attacks, we will be there. That is in the US national interest. So when this comes up in Taiwan, when Taiwanese officials, Taiwanese ministers and defense officials are asked about this, quite often the response is, well, at the end of the day, the defense of Taiwan is the responsibility of Taiwan, right? Taiwan must rely on itself for defense. And Taiwan has had to, for a very long time, rely on itself. This certainly since 1979, when the United States broke diplomatic relations with Taiwan. Of course, at the time, it wasn't just breaking diplomatic relations, it was that defense treaty that they had that is no longer in force.
And perhaps it might well do if President Trump becomes, if he has a second term. In recent weeks, he said that Taiwan should pay pay the US if it wants protection. He said in an interview, "I don't think we're any different from an insurance policy." And he's also said at campaign rallies that he got on very well with President Xi. Ben, do you think a second-term President Trump would abandon Taiwan?
So that's obviously the debate that has been going on in Taiwan since President Trump made those comments. But if you look at Taiwan's response to this, Taiwan has been saying things like, well, we are very dedicated to boosting our defense spending. So a big thing that President Trump has is for US allies to spend more on their defense, especially when it came to NATO, saying that the European allies were not pulling their weight, they need to spend more. Well, if you look at Taiwan's defense spending as a portion of GDP, I think the budgeted figure for next year is going to be something like 2.5%. And actually, when this was announced by the cabinet and by the defense ministry here, they said, well, actually, our ultimate goal, we really want to push it up to 3%. So that is actually the kind of thing that Republicans want to hear from Taiwan, that it is committed to spending enough money on defending itself.
And more generally about the election as it's going on in Taiwan, are people in Taiwan interested in the US election, Kwangyin? Is there fear when they hear Trump say, oh, you know, Taiwan should pay us like an insurance policy?
I would say 4 years ago, when I think people here were very excited about Trump presidency because he picked up the phone from former President Tsai Ing-wen. That was a first. That was really unprecedented. So people felt that, oh, President Trump was very pro-Taiwan, and his hawkish stance towards China was also found by a lot of Taiwanese people to be encouraging, that it might be a sign that he wanted to be friendlier to Taiwan. But I think we all knew what happened next. It turned out that he actually knew very little about Taiwan, and he compared, I think it was in one of the books that his former aide wrote, that he compared Taiwan to a small pen and China is the entire desk. So which showed that he really did not have a lot of respect for Taiwan. So I felt that yes, people are paying close attention to this election, but they're less enthusiastic toward a Trump presidency, I would say.
The other thing that I would add here is that there was a fear even when Trump was president, that because he is a businessman and he views a lot of these things transactionally, that perhaps he might go to China and say, well, I will strike a grand bargain with you. Part of that grand bargain is essentially you could do, let's say, for argument's sake, you can do what you want with Taiwan. In exchange, China gives whatever it happens to be that Trump wants China to give him. So there is, you know, and that people remember that, right? When you talk to people, that is something that people bring up. The other point I would make about the defense spending issue, about President Trump saying, you know, Taiwan should pay us, whatever. So Taiwan actually has something like a $19 billion backlog in arms sales from the United States. Like, Taiwan wants to buy these weapons, right? Taiwan has repeatedly complained that these weapons, whether it's new F-16Vs or the Stinger missiles, are not coming.
Kwangyin, you say that Trump, it was seen that he didn't quite understand Taiwan, but he still did a lot for Taiwan as president in a way. You know, he was seen at the time as giving unprecedented support to Taiwan. You know, he signed into law legislation, basically enshrined US support for Taiwan. He sent the 2 highest ranking officials to Taiwan from the US in 40 years. So he did do stuff for Taiwan. It's just lately he seems to be saying other things. And again, you know, like Ben says, he sold more arms to Taiwan than anyone else. But perhaps that was just his business dealings coming to the fore. He wanted to make money from Taiwan. What do you think?
Well, actually, what President Trump did, and this has been continued under the Biden administration, is that he regularized arms sales to Taiwan. right? And this has continued. There have been a series every couple of months. The Americans will announce sort of more progress on things that they're going to sell. The most recent one was in June when it was $360 million for drones and related equipment, right? So this has been regularized. That isn't something that we'd seen previously. It sort of is a little bit more ad hoc, those arms sales. So in that sense, there was continuity from the Trump administration into the current Biden administration.
And indeed, Biden has been seen as giving a lot of support as well. I'm interested in your views. Who do you think has given more support to Taiwan, President Biden or President Trump?
It's a difficult question to answer, but I would say that it's true that, as Louise mentioned, that the arms sales has been regularized. But I do think that the one thing that the Taiwanese public cares about the most is still international trade. And I think what President Trump said recently about taxing Taiwanese chips and saying that Taiwan has stolen chip manufacturing from the US has really raised some eyebrows here. So that was really something that I would say hurt a lot of feelings of Taiwanese people.
Well, hold that thought, because we'll come back and we'll discuss the chip business. Let's take a quick break now. You're watching Correspondents on TaiwanPlus. Next up, we'll be asking, has Taiwan stolen the US's chip business? Stay tuned.
In the face of adversity, the power of truth.
A roadmap for a just and open world, charted by the freest country in Asia.
Taipei for TaiwanPlus.
TaiwanPlus News, a voice of freedom in Asia.
For more stories from Taiwan and around the world, download the TaiwanPlus app and follow us on social media.
Welcome back to Correspondents. I'm Louise Watt. Today we're talking about the US elections and the impact they could have on Taiwan. It's not just Taiwan's security that's an issue in this election. Taiwan produces chips that are critical for the world economy. And the Biden administration has made it clear that it supports chips from Taiwan whilst also undermining China's developing industry. But Donald Trump has now sounded a critical note, suggesting that he might have some problems with Taiwan chips. He told Bloomberg Businessweek, "Taiwan took our chip business from us. I mean, how stupid are we? They took all of our chip business. They're immensely wealthy." Taiwan stole our chip business, according to Donald Trump. Kwangyin, how accurate is this?
Well, I think it's really important to look back into history and examine how the chip manufacturing business started. I want to refer back to a conversation we hosted last year between the author of Chip War, Chris Miller, and Morris Chang, the founder of TSMC. So in that very wonderful conversation, they recounted the origin of the chip manufacturing business. So TSMC and Morris Chang and his gang, they essentially built chip manufacturing business from scratch. And this business model was really created in Taiwan because it didn't really exist in the States. So I think we could safely say that not only did Taiwan not steal the chip making business from US, I think American chip design companies were really able to prosper and be so strong as they are today because of the success of Taiwanese chip makers like TSMC.
And what were some of the things that Morris Chang said he had to do to actually kickstart this industry here in Taiwan?
I would say that you could refer back to the history of K.T. Lee, who was really crucial figure in Taiwan's government in recruiting all these wonderful engineers back from the US. And they had to really go through rigorous research and development and they have to stay in the fab like 20, sometimes up to 20 hours a day tending the machine. And this was really something quite unimaginable.
How are Taiwanese officials reacting to Trump's words, Ben, that Taiwan's stole our chip business?
So Taiwan hosted the big Semicon conference for the semiconductor industry earlier in September, and the Taiwan's economy minister Guo Zihui, he did a little chat with reporters before this event started. So I asked him this question directly, like, did Taiwan steal the US chip industry? And he said he thought that Donald Trump had a lot on his plate, and that he thought he'd been misinformed. So those comments, of course, they go down very badly in Taiwan. And also you look at what the Taiwanese chip industry, TSMC in particular, has been doing with its investments towards the United States. And TSMC is stumping up $65 billion to build these 3 fabs in Arizona. Of course, they are getting some subsidies from the United States, right? And it is more expensive to manufacture in the United States. You're taking these enormous factories and you're trying to recreate this ecosystem that already exists in Taiwan, that has existed for many decades, that has been built up for many decades. And I think there's a sort of a degree of frustration from Taiwanese officials sometimes when you talk to them about not understanding, perhaps, that you can't just simply like drop TSMC somewhere and be like, expect it to be like immediately that's going to happen, or that some other countries' national chip champions are going to suddenly be able to compete. I mean, look at the problems that Intel is having at the moment. You know, Intel has been trying to get back into the chip manufacturing business that it essentially abandoned many decades ago, which TSMC then took, and those results have been quite disappointing so far.
Well, what TSMC's projects in Arizona will allow the US to do is, for the first time, they will have these advanced chips made on US soil. So that's a positive from the Biden-Harris administration, we could say. That's why they've given all these extra subsidies. On chips still, but also moving slightly more to the economy. Taiwan's exports to the United States hit a record high in August, almost $44 billion. Those billions were driven by chips for the AI industry. The US has a trade deficit with Taiwan. That's a sore spot for Trump. Kwangyin, could there be trouble ahead in US-Taiwan trade relations under a President Trump or even under a President Harris?
Yeah, here I would like to quote something Morris Chang said last year in our forum. He said that in the chip world, globalization is dead. And he said that with much, I think, lament. Because the chip industry was able to be so prosperous because of globalization and division of labor. But right now, I think trade deficit is seen by President Trump to be a very negative thing. It's something that he has to fix. So I had a very interesting conversation with Daniel Liu. He's a trade expert with Zhonghua Jingji Yanjiuyuan, Zhonghua Economic Research Institute. And he is very worried about what Trump said about he might impose tariffs, blanket tariffs on all imports into the States, and in particular chips, advanced chips from Taiwan will be slashed with tariffs. And I think this is something that makes a lot of Taiwanese people very worried because, well, tariffs actually make things more expensive, and eventually it's going to be the consumers and the importers themselves that are going to they're going to shoulder the costs.
And also on the free trade agreement route, because you've done, your magazine has published articles on the past on free trade agreements and the fact that Taiwan doesn't have that many, and it could be storing up trouble in the future.
So it's very interesting. I think there is a bifurcation of Taiwan's economy that we're seeing. So the people or the businesses that have something to do with tech or chip making, semiconductors, they are booming because they have been able to take advantage to ITA, that's International Technology Agreement. Their exports are without tariffs. But for the other more traditional manufacturing industries, for example, steel making, petrochemical, or other chemical products, they face high tariffs, whether we want to export to Southeast Asia or China. Now they don't enjoy ECFA anymore. I think these industries are the ones that are really not doing so well in Taiwan compared to the tech giants.
And of course, the reason, the big elephant in the room, why doesn't Taiwan have many free trade agreements? It's because of pressure from China. Ben, what do you think about that? After the US elections, what does Taiwan want on the economic front?
So Taiwan has pushed for a long time for the signing of a free trade agreement with the United States, right? So the Biden administration excluded Taiwan from its Indo-Pacific Economic Framework Agreement of some 3 years ago, but they offered Taiwan instead something called the 21st Century Initiative on Trade with Taiwan. So there's been actually quite a lot of progress on this, but still Taiwanese officials, the Office for Trade Negotiations here has been quite open in saying, well, we hope eventually this is our long-term goal. Now the problem for Taiwan is that there's no political will for signing really any free trade agreements, yet alone with Taiwan. So the American Chamber of Commerce in Taiwan, I mean, they've been actually pushing this. They strongly support it, so we should do this. And they point out, well, actually, if you look in the US Congress, really the only issue that people can agree on both sides of the aisle, is support for Taiwan. So actually there is a political, perhaps, precondition that exists there. And they also say, well, with this 21st century agreement that is being negotiated, once you've got a lot of these agreements signed and sealed, then you're actually pretty well along the track to then agreeing a trade agreement. So it's not out of the possibility of imagining that perhaps that could eventually lead to one. But at the moment it does seem like that with no political will in Washington for this kind of free trade agreement, it's probably dead in the water.
Well, thank you very much, both of you, for your insights on US-Taiwan trade relations, political relations, and also how people in Taiwan are viewing the US elections. But of course, Taiwan is much more than just chips and China. Let's talk a little about the other reporting that you've been doing. Kwangyin, recently you've been traveling up and down Taiwan visiting garbage mountains. Can you tell us why?
Right. So this is actually a pretty rare story that we did. I think a lot of people would find it really hard to imagine that actually the largest garbage mountain in Taiwan is very close to the center of chip making. So this is in Hsinchu. It's only half an hour away from Hsinchu Science Park. This is a Xinfeng garbage mountain. And when I took a walk inside, it's really like the Taroko Gorge made of trash. And you could see that there's plastic trash all over, and some of them have been buried there for years, simply because Hsinchu County doesn't have an incinerator on its own. And in the past, it was no problem because they were really depending on the incinerator in Hsinchu City. But since now they're ruled by mayor from different parties, and so they would say
political infighting means people aren't getting their trash sorted.
Yeah, and also another reason is that the incinerators make more money burning trash from let's say factories or businesses. They could charge more money. In our story, you could see that there are as many as 48 garbage mountains across Taiwan. And in our interview with the environmental minister, he promised that this problem will, well, he didn't say be solved per se, but will not be visible in 3 years. So there will be different ways to deal with the garbage, maybe burn them or cover it up with something. So there will be some creative solutions to solve that.
Because of course now Taiwan cannot export its garbage to China and countries in Southeast Asia.
Right, yeah. So before the year 2017, it was possible to export plastic waste to either China or Southeast Asia.
Ben, before we go, what are you looking forward to over the coming weeks here in Taiwan?
So over the next month or so, we've got two things that are coming up that I will be paying particularly close attention to. One is President Lai will be giving his first National Day speech on October the 10th. Normally China reacts very badly to these speeches from that we've seen from President Tsai. So of course we'll be watching to see what he says about China and what response it gets from China.
Well, more warships, more planes.
I mean, who can say at the moment? And the other thing that I'm looking forward to at the end of October is Taiwan Pride, which of course is the largest pride that takes place in East Asia. We already know that Nymphia Wind will be attending. Of course, that's Taiwan's winner for RuPaul's Drag Race. But
Taiwan's most famous drag queen.
Taiwan's most famous drag queen. So last year at Pride, Vice President Lai, as he was then, in the middle of election campaign, he was there. He went to Pride. This is the highest level political leader that's ever attended a Pride. So I'll be watching out this year to see whether there is a similar level of attendance by the government and to see how that goes down. So I think it's a case of watch this space for Taiwan Pride.
Well, great, and we'll be following your reporting, both of you. Thank you very much for joining me today.
Thank you, Louise.
Thank you.
That was Managing Editor of CommonWealth Magazine, Kwangyin Liu, and Reuters Taiwan Bureau Chief, Ben Blanchard. And thank you for watching. I'm Louise Watt, and this has been Correspondents. Do join us again next time.